Can infidelity be forgiven? The concept of forgiveness may not fully apply to cheating. It is possible for someone to accept or not accept adultery. Just because a person has come to terms with it does not mean they have forgiven it. Cheating is a difficult betrayal to forgive, and its impact may always linger. Understanding the reasons behind infidelity, when it is uncovered and inevitable, makes it even harder to expect forgiveness. It's puzzling why some people, especially women, fail to grasp this truth. A man who truly values himself will never forgive and tolerate cheating. Being in a relationship with a cheating partner is akin to constantly smoking other people's discarded cigarette butts. The reasons behind the cheating are secondary. Justifications like lack of love, dissatisfaction, or feeling unappreciated as a woman are simply not valid. If one is unhappy in their marriage, the appropriate course of action is to seek a divorce. However, many women choose to stay within the marriage and avoid chasing after flings. For a woman whose husband cheats, she might mistakenly believe that she is in a constant state of love, which is actually far from the truth. Even the presence of children or a long marriage holds little significance. Particularly if the lover is younger, she eventually exposes the affair and confidently leaves her husband, tearing down everything she had built over time. Typically, the affair does not last long. After some time, she experiences a delayed awakening and regrets her actions. Tears and pleas follow as she visits her ex-husband, suddenly remembering the children she left behind. They too are entangled in the turmoil, with any means necessary, from blackmail to tantrums, being used. Unfortunately, all that remains of the once happy family are ashes, with no possibility of turning back. In my own experience, my mother left when I was just 2.5 years old. However, my father chose not to remarry and devoted all his love to me. Aunt Olga, his sister, played a significant role in raising me. Every summer, I had the opportunity to visit her dacha and spend time with her children, Nana and Vadik. However, my life took a sudden turn when my father passed away when I was 17 years old. Left alone, I made the decision to pursue my education at the Leningrad Artillery School. As a cadet, my days were consumed by the rigorous training and responsibilities. My mother's whereabouts were unknown to me, and truthfully, I had little interest in her or her activities. It was clear to me that she had disappeared from my life, and there were no reminders of her in our home besides a photograph that my father had taken away. Upon completing my schooling, I served in the army for a period before being assigned as an artillery instructor in one of the African countries. Due to the language barrier, I relied on an interpreter to communicate with the local troops in the mortar battery. This assignment lasted for 1.5 years, during which I dedicated myself to training the soldiers. One unfortunate day, I carelessly broke a fundamental rule by drinking water from the local sources after an exercise. The scorching heat made it irresistible, but this decision had severe consequences. I contracted hepatitis and was subsequently sent back home for treatment. My hospital stay lasted for approximately 2 months as I battled against the persistent illness. It was during this challenging time that I encountered Vera, a lovely nurse. Our paths crossed and a romance blossomed between us. I had always struggled when it came to interacting with women. The world seemed to come crashing down when I met Vera, and before I knew it, we were married by the time I was discharged from the hospital. I was then deployed to the Baltics and Vera decided to come along with me. It wasn't long before our son Igor was born. I longed for more children, but Vera adamantly refused, stating that she wanted to focus on her own life while still being young. It was the first sign of trouble, but I chose to ignore it back then. My military service seemed to drag on endlessly. I found myself going on long, dangerous missions, spending less and less time with my family. In the Army, no one really cares about your personal problems. The main priority is fulfilling your duty from dawn till dusk. Occasionally, we would have 2 days off, one in the summer and one in the winter, but the rest of the time was dedicated to serving. I missed my son and my wife terribly. Whenever I was home, I tried my best to spend quality time with my family. However, I started noticing that my presence seemed to burden Vera. It felt as if she wasn't happy with me anymore. Even my son started to distance himself from me. One day, I was sent on a business trip overseas. I assumed it would only last a month, but it ended up being almost half a year. Throughout that time, I tried numerous times to reach out to my family, but to no avail. I wrote letters, made countless attempts to call them, but received very little response. Vera only responded to me once, and her letter was filled with generic phrases. It seemed as if she wrote out of obligation rather than love. I never received another letter from her. Everything has its conclusion, and my business trip reached its end as well. Upon my return to the unit, I promptly submitted my files at headquarters and made my way back home. Went hardly does justice to my journey. I practically soared home, buoyed by anticipation. Vera was conspicuously absent upon my arrival, and Igor was out playing in the yard under the watchful eye of a neighbor. When she caught sight of me, her demeanor shifted, and she mentioned that Vera had gone to the store, asking her to look after Yegor. It was evident she was withholding something from me, but I chose to let it slide. Instead, I took my son's hand, and we headed home. On the way, Igor was animatedly narrating his experiences at daycare, his newfound friends, and how his dad would pick him up when his mom was preoccupied. Daddy. I halted involuntarily, my heart racing. What daddy? Daddy Kostya, Igor replied, peering at me intently. He loves me and promised to get me a big red car. Suddenly he asked, Uncle, how long will you stay with us? I'm not an uncle, I'm your dad. My voice felt parched. No, my dad is Kostya. My mom says that we'll soon be going far away with him. Igor beamed with delight. It's just that when you come, my dad leads home. You stay with us, but not for long, because I miss my dad. I was taken aback by my own composure. One might expect me to erupt in anguish, to rush off in search of Vera, to demand answers from her. Yet my heart merely quickened its pace, and I remained oddly calm. We arrived home. I presented Igor with the gifts I had brought, then retreated to the bathroom. Amid the sound of rushing water, I could discern the front door slamming shut. Vera must have rushed in. I took my time, feeling repulsed at the thought of touching anything in this apartment. I dressed and ventured outside. Vera was in the kitchen. Welcome home, Slava, she exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy as she attempted to kiss my cheek. I'm going to whip up something delicious for you. I pulled away. Don't, Vera. Have a seat and let's have a conversation. I felt a chilling numbness within me, subduing my anger. It was as though I were watching myself from an outsider's perspective, as if these events were unfolding for someone else, not me. Faith seemed to sense something and slowly lowered herself onto the stool. How long have you been in touch with Papa Kostya, and when are you planning to leave? My expression turned into an emotionless facade. Vera had never witnessed me like this before. Suddenly, she recoiled, casting her eyes downward, avoiding my gaze. How? She whispered. How do I know everything? I attempted a grin, but it was beyond my capabilities. My lips remained frozen, locked to my teeth. It doesn't matter. How long have you been in love? Almost a year, she replied softly. I don't know how it happened. I wanted to leave him, but it was overpowering. He made me feel like a woman worth loving. You're never home. Her voice began to rise. Stop it, Vera. I stood up. You're an adult, and you've made your choice. I'll file for divorce myself. I'll visit Igor whenever possible, and take into account that the apartment is provided through my work. Find your own place. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, grabbed my cap from the rack, and headed toward the front door. You won't even ask who he is. Vera sobbed. I shrugged, silently opened the door, and walked out. No emotions, just an icy detachment inside. Our lives seemed to be entangled in a game of fate. First, my mother left me, and now my wife has betrayed me. She even attempted to take my son away. Daddy Kostya. I shook my head, trying to push these intrusive thoughts away. Only time will reveal what awaits us next. During the trial, my wife vehemently accused me of various sins, pouring contempt upon me. The accusation of adultery was particularly scandalous. They claimed that my prolonged absence from home was due to an affair. Throughout our married life, I supposedly abused and degraded her. Even the neighbor confirmed this, avoiding eye contact with me throughout the proceedings. I couldn't help but admire my wife's performance. She transformed from the instigator of our divorce into a victim of domestic violence. I chose not to object or argue. After all, a mistress is a mistress. The elderly judge looked sympathetically towards Vera, perhaps driven by a sense of gender solidarity. It seemed that all men were deemed villains, and women were portrayed as foolish. The final outcome: divorce and a demand for alimony. I was even forbidden from seeing my son without my ex-wife's permission. However, I could not obtain anything from this trial. The apartment was government property, and we had acquired nothing else. Throughout the proceedings, Daddy Kostya was nowhere to be found. As we left the courthouse, I couldn't help but ask Vera, "Aren't you ashamed?" Of course, I never received an answer. I resided in the officer's dormitory for a period of time. She forbade me from approaching her son, so I observed him from a distance, and that's when I caught glimpses of Kostya's father. A young, arrogant man, his face filled with unwavering disdain and arrogance. Oh, women, where are your discerning eyes and rationality? Well, it's obvious where they reside. It was challenging to receive sympathetic looks from my colleagues, but no one spoke about my divorce. After a month, Vera showed up at my dormitory. Her determination and arrogance had noticeably diminished. "Can I come in?" She hesitantly paused at the doorway. "Come in." I responded with a single word. I had no desire to waste my energy and emotions on interacting with this woman. "Soon, your son will have nowhere to live." She began with defiance. We were offered to vacate the provided apartment. In return, they offered us a dwelling in a remote and desolate place. I remained silent, having nothing to say to her, especially since I had warned her beforehand. "You have an apartment in your town. Sell it, help your child, and also help yourself and your roommate." I smiled. "I'm sorry, darling, but you knew what you were getting into. I could benefit from the apartment myself. You heartless bastard, denying your own son." She wiped away her tears. Kostya was right. I stood up. "Vera, I'll give you a moment to make your exit, and let's avoid any more confrontations," I declared firmly. She swiftly seized her bag and made her escape through the door. 2 weeks passed before I returned from my duty, and as I watched over the surroundings, my eyes caught sight of Vera, hand in hand with Yegor. "Could you keep an eye on Yegor for a while? Kostya and I are leaving this place. We'll settle down in a new location, and I'll pick him up later," she whispered, avoiding my gaze. I embraced my son tightly, but Vera remained silent. A month later, my transfer took me to the south, and life became a whirlwind. Gradually, I started to regain my equilibrium. The most important thing was that Igor was with me. He grew and matured over time. Initially, he asked about his mother, but eventually he stopped, seemingly comprehending the situation. Vera never appeared or attempted to contact me, despite me leaving my address at the dormitory just in case. It was tough, and at one point, I even considered getting married so my son would have a mother figure. However, I soon realized that no woman is obligated to raise another man's child. Society might expect a man to love and care for an adopted child, but no such expectation applies to women. So we lived as a two-man team. And on those rare occasions when someone showed interest, I didn't bring them home, not wanting to cause any emotional turmoil for my son. 15 years came and went, bringing numerous changes. Igor was now attending a military academy, and fate led me back to my hometown, where I established a military school and assumed the position of its head. I had never envisioned myself donning the pants with general's stripes, but there was plenty of work to be done. When autumn arrived, classes began, and things began to settle down. I finally had some free time. Then one evening, I discovered I was out of bread. It wasn't a catastrophe, but I couldn't have dinner without it. Feeling too lazy to change, I headed to the nearest supermarket, dressed in my casual home sweatpants and sweatshirt. At the checkout, I laid eyes on a slender young woman. It couldn't be Vera, but what was she doing in my town? It seemed like she sensed my presence and turned to look at me. Glory! She examined me from top to bottom. It seems my life hasn't been all that great. Why do you say that? I managed to give her a strained smile. Oh, come on. It's quite evident, Vera stated bluntly, seemingly pleased with the notion that my life wasn't successful according to her standards. At least you're not homeless, she added, adjusting her coat and tossing her hair cheerfully. Clearly, things were going well for her. I could tell she was itching to ask more questions, but I remained silent. Eventually, she couldn't resist any longer. How is Igor? I hope he's doing well. For a brief moment, guilt flashed across her gaze. He's doing great. In 2 years, he'll be graduating from the academy. I responded, trying to answer her question without reciprocating. Vera seemed eager to inquire further, but we were interrupted by a young girl approaching us. Mom, who's that? She shot me a disdainful look before turning to Vera. Taking the girl under her arm, Vera replied, Oh, just an old acquaintance. We used to work together. She glanced at me. Do you have a business card? Oh, never mind, I don't. Take mine. If you ever need help, I'll treat you to a bowl of soup. Vera gracefully turned and silently made her way to the exit with her daughter. I watched her toss the business card into the trash without reading it, and continued on to choose some bread for dinner. More time had passed, and it was by sheer chance that I found myself reunited with Vera, this time as a lieutenant general. I was on my way to Igor's graduation, relieved to finally be sitting in my seat on the plane after the tiresome pre-flight formalities. Sitting beside me was a young woman who seemed intrigued by my presence. However, to my surprise, I noticed Vera walking down the aisle accompanied by my daughter, whom I had already become acquainted with, and a pompous-looking colonel, presumably her husband. It was clear from a mile away that the colonel was filled with self-importance, despite likely never having ventured beyond the Arbit military district. Vera caught sight of me, unsure of how to react. Eventually, she gathered herself and introduced me to her companions as a former colleague. Are you in the military too? The colonel inquired, suddenly cheerful. Where did you serve, and what rank? Vera attempted to take charge of the situation. In various places, yes, Slava. And his rank? Major. The colonel smiled condescendingly. Ah, not everyone has a successful career, he remarked, smugly glancing at his companion. Vera, my dear, you flatter me. Unfortunately, he is not a major, but a mere lieutenant. I feigned a mournful expression. Vera's daughter couldn't conceal her disdain as she chuckled. So young, yet only a lieutenant. Yes, I had not lived up to the expectations of my ex-wife. Appearances can indeed be deceptive. The colonel quickly lost interest in me and turned his attention to the newspaper. As the plane safely landed, the ramp was extended, and passengers began to disembark onto the concrete, making their way to the awaiting bus. Comrade Lieutenant General, I turned around, startled, as the stern colonel raised his hand in salute. A car is waiting for you, he said, pointing to a sleek black vehicle adorned with military license plates. I glanced at Vera and her companions, and their shocked expressions mirrored the colonel's astonishment. Would you like a ride? I asked casually, getting into the back seat. The colonel slammed the car door and joined the driver as we made our way towards the airport terminal exit. Later, after the commencement ceremony had ended, I sought out my son Yegor to congratulate him on his promotion to lieutenant and his graduation from the academy. He was engaged in conversation with a woman who turned to look at me when she noticed our presence. Vera, I exclaimed, realizing her identity. Though my general's uniform sharply contrasted with the wrinkled sweatpants I had been wearing just 2 years prior, Vera struggled to compose herself. I came to congratulate Yegor. You don't mind. You told me yourself about his graduation from the academy, she stammered. Yegor, seemingly perplexed, glanced between the two of us. Yes, Dad, this is your mother, he confirmed, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. But I don't have a mother. The person I had as a mother died a long time ago, he retorted, his tone strained. Let's go, Dad. I need to collect my orders from the military unit. As we got into the car, I noticed Vera standing frozen, her hands clasped tightly to her chest, her gaze fixed on us.